everyone assumes a used hybrid means an expensive battery replacement waiting to happen. That fear alone has kept prices on some genuinely excellent cars artificially low for years. The 6 I'm covering today have already proven themselves, batteries included, and nobody's buying them anyway. Let's get into it. Number 1. The Toyota Prius, the second generation, built between roughly 2003 and 2009. This is the car that invented the modern hybrid category. And it's also the car everyone's most nervous about buying second-hand, purely because of battery horror stories that mostly originated from poorly maintained taxi examples, rather than the technology itself. The reality is that Toyota's hybrid system from this generation is astonishingly conservative in how it treats the battery, never fully charging or discharging it, which is precisely why so many of these are still running on their original battery pack past 200,000 miles. I've had these through with genuinely absurd mileages, the hybrid system itself barely aging at all, because Toyota built enormous safety margins into how hard the battery ever actually works. The interior feels dated now, all beige plastic and a dashboard layout that hasn't aged particularly gracefully. But underneath that unfashionable shell is a hybrid system that private hire drivers have trusted with their livelihoods for 2 decades. If the battery does eventually need replacing, reconditioned packs are now cheap and widely available specifically because so many of these exist, which removes the one genuine risk that scares most buyers away. Check the 12-volt auxiliary battery is in good condition, since that's the one that actually causes most starting problems people mistake for hybrid battery failure, and you've bought pioneering hybrid technology for less than the price of a decent second-hand bicycle. There's a particular irony to the second-generation Prius that's worth mentioning. Taxi fleets across Europe adopted it precisely because of its reliability, running some examples past 300,000 miles on the original battery pack in daily, unrelenting service. Those same taxi examples then flooded the used market with high mileages attached, which spooked private buyers who assumed the number on the odometer told the whole story. It never did. A Prius that's covered 250,000 gentle motorway miles as a minicab has usually experienced a far easier life than one that's covered 60,000 miles of aggressive short urban journeys. Number 2. The Honda Insight, the second generation, built from around 2009 onward. Nobody remembers this car exists, largely because it lived permanently in the shadow of the Prius, despite offering genuinely comparable reliability for a fraction of the attention and the price. Honda's hybrid system, called Integrated Motor Assist, works differently from Toyota's approach, using the electric motor to assist the petrol engine rather than drive independently, which makes it mechanically simpler and, in practice, just as durable. I picked one of these up 18 months ago for a client who specifically wanted hybrid economy without hybrid anxiety, paid barely anything for a car with 100,000 miles and full history, and it's been faultless since. The simplicity of Honda's system means there's genuinely less to go wrong compared to more complex hybrid architectures, and the battery pack, being smaller and less heavily worked than a Prius equivalent, tends to age even more gracefully. Watch for the CVT-style transmission feeling unusual if you've never driven one before, which is normal rather than faulty, and confirm the hybrid battery health has been checked recently, a service most independent hybrid specialists now offer cheaply. Beyond that, this is one of the most overlooked hybrids in the entire used market, priced as though it's a risk when it's actually one of the safer bets available. What's genuinely strange about the Insight's position in the market is that it should, by rights, command a premium over the Prius among informed buyers, given how much simpler its hybrid architecture is. Fewer components means fewer things capable of failing, and Honda's engineering during this period had a reputation for precision that arguably exceeded Toyota's own. Instead, it sits cheaper, purely because the marketing budget behind the Prius name created a category association that Honda never managed to break into, regardless of how sound the actual engineering underneath happened to be. Number 3. The Lexus RX 400h, the first-generation hybrid SUV built from roughly 2005. People hear Lexus and assume expensive, and then they hear hybrid SUV and assume even more expensive, And that compounded assumption has kept genuinely excellent examples sitting unsold for months at prices that reflect fear rather than reality. Underneath the badge is Toyota's hybrid engineering applied to a larger, more capable platform, built during a period when Lexus was throwing serious engineering resources at proving hybrid technology could work at scale. I've seen these do well past 200,000 miles, the hybrid battery still performing within normal parameters, the four-wheel drive system adding genuine capability that most hybrid buyers never even think to look for. The running costs on these genuinely surprise people who've only ever owned conventional petrol SUVs, and the depreciation has been so severe precisely because nobody wants a Lexus hybrid SUV from this era, which makes the value proposition almost absurd if you're willing to look past the badge anxiety. Check for consistent full-service history, specifically at a hybrid specialist rather than a generalist garage, since correct diagnosis of hybrid-specific issues matters more here than on a conventional car. And inspect the battery cooling fan for dust buildup, an easy but often neglected maintenance point. Solve for those two things, and you've bought genuinely premium hybrid engineering for a price that reflects nothing but unfounded caution. The depreciation on these has been particularly severe because the RX 400h occupies an awkward space in most buyers' minds, neither a conventional Lexus SUV nor an obvious eco-conscious choice, and that ambiguity has meant it's rarely anyone's first choice for either category of buyer. That ambiguity is entirely the market's problem, not the car's. Mechanically, it remains exactly what it was designed to be: a large, comfortable, genuinely capable hybrid SUV that happens to have fallen through a gap in how people categorize their car searches. A quick thought here, not a request, just something worth sitting with. Every hybrid on this list got avoided specifically because of a fear about batteries that almost never materializes in practice when the car's been looked after. That fear has been worth thousands of pounds to whoever was patient enough to look past it. Number 4. The Toyota Auris hybrid, built from around 2010 onward. This is essentially a Prius wearing a more conventional hatchback body, sharing the same proven hybrid system underneath, while looking considerably less unusual to anyone put off by the Prius's distinctive styling. That shared mechanical foundation means it inherits all the same durability. And because the Auris badge carries less hybrid-specific attention than the Prius name, prices on these have consistently stayed lower for equivalent mileage and condition. I've had customers run these as daily commuter cars for years without a single hybrid-related issue. The battery performing exactly as Toyota's conservative engineering intended, fuel economy remaining genuinely impressive well into six-figure mileages. Nobody's excited about buying an Auris. That lack of excitement is precisely why you can find genuinely well-maintained examples for prices that feel almost accidental. Watch for the same 12-volt auxiliary battery consideration as the Prius, since it shares the underlying system, and confirm the car has had regular hybrid health checks rather than being treated exactly like a conventional petrol car throughout its life. Beyond that, this is proven Prius reliability in a shape that doesn't announce itself, for a price that undersells what's actually happening mechanically. I've often thought the Auris hybrid is the single best disguised bargain on the entire used market. It looks, from the outside, like any other unremarkable family hatchback from the period, and that visual anonymity does more to keep the price down than any genuine mechanical concern ever could. Buyers searching specifically for hybrid technology gravitate toward the Prius by name recognition alone, leaving the mechanically identical Auris to sell for meaningfully less to whoever happens to notice what's actually written on the spec sheet. Number 5. The Toyota Yaris hybrid, the first generation, built from around 2012. Small hybrids get dismissed constantly because people assume the technology only makes sense at a larger scale. And that assumption has left genuinely excellent small hybrid engineering sitting at prices that reflect a super mini rather than the sophisticated system actually underneath the bonnet. Toyota applied the exact same conservative hybrid philosophy to this smaller platform, and the results have been just as durable, if not more so, given the reduced overall strain on a smaller, lighter vehicle. I bought one of these 2 years ago for a young driver who needed something cheap to insure and cheap to run. 130,000 miles on the clock, and it's continued running with genuinely negligible running costs since. The battery pack, being proportionally smaller than the larger Toyota hybrids, seems to suffer even less real-world degradation, and the entire car remains genuinely pleasant to drive around town, despite costing barely anything to purchase. Check that the car hasn't spent its life exclusively on short journeys without ever reaching full operating temperature, since that pattern can affect long-term component health across any hybrid system and confirm basic hybrid battery health through a specialist check. Solve for that, and you've bought genuinely proven hybrid technology in the cheapest possible package the used market currently offers. Insurance groups on this generation of Yaris hybrid also tend to sit lower than you'd expect for a car with hybrid technology on board, another detail that surprises buyers who assume added complexity automatically means added cost across every category. For a young or new driver specifically, that combination of low purchase price, low running costs, and low insurance rarely comes bundled together anywhere else in the market, hybrid or otherwise. Number 6, and I've kept this one for last because it surprises people every single time I mention it. The Lexus GS450H, built from around 2006. This is possibly the most dramatically underpriced hybrid in the entire British used market. A full-size executive saloon with genuinely serious performance credentials, powered by a hybrid system built to the same exacting standard as everything else Lexus was doing during this era. Nobody buys these, largely because the running costs of a large executive Lexus sound intimidating on paper. And that assumption completely ignores the fact that the hybrid system was specifically engineered to offset exactly that kind of running cost. I picked one of these up from an auction specifically because nobody else was bidding on it, paid remarkably little for a car that would have cost tens of thousands new, and the hybrid battery has performed flawlessly since, the car delivering genuinely serious performance alongside genuinely reasonable running costs that completely contradict what the badge and size would suggest. The depreciation curve on cars like this has been brutal, specifically because so few buyers understand what they're actually looking at when they see the listing. Check service history carefully given the complexity of the overall vehicle beyond just the hybrid system itself, and confirm the battery has been checked by someone who actually understands Lexus hybrid architecture rather than a generalist. Solve for that, and you've bought an executive saloon with genuine hybrid sophistication for a price that reflects nothing but a badge and a size category most buyers have talked themselves out of before even looking properly. 6. Hybrids. All of them avoided because of a fear about batteries that, in every single case, turned out to be far smaller than the reputation suggested. I should say something that applies to all 6 of these, not just 1 or 2. The battery anxiety that keeps prices down on used hybrids was largely formed by early, poorly understood technology and worst-case stories that got repeated far more often than they actually happened. In every single case on this list, the manufacturers involved built enormous conservative margins into how hard they ever actually worked these battery packs, specifically because they knew a battery failure early in the hybrid era would have killed public confidence in the entire technology. What actually determines whether one of these 6 is a brilliant purchase or an expensive mistake isn't really the badge, and it's barely even the mileage. It's whether the car has genuine, documented hybrid-specific servicing rather than being treated like an ordinary petrol car by someone who never quite understood what they owned. A hybrid maintained properly by someone who respected the technology will consistently outlast one that was simply driven and never thought about, regardless of which badge happens to be on the boot. Every car on this list was ignored for the same underlying reason, a fear formed early in hybrid history that never quite updated itself as the technology matured and proved itself over hundreds of thousands of real-world miles. That outdated fear is now worth thousands of pounds to anyone patient enough to look past it and check the actual history rather than assume the worst. Next time you're scrolling through listings and a hybrid catches your eye at a price that feels too low to make sense, given what it actually offers, it might be worth a longer look than the badge or the running costs would normally get from you. The cars nobody trusts are often the ones that quietly earned that trust years ago, long before anyone was paying enough attention to notice.